This is the first time in history of humanity that we've had a machine that can, one, talk like us and interact like us, and then two, has agency to make decisions within that interaction. We need a whole new set of skills and a new way of thinking about moral and emotional and social development in the context of those interactions because we need to understand how to interact, but then also, are the interactions actually degrading us?
Our Capita colleague, visiting fellow Alana Benin, recently wrote that every industrial revolution has reshaped family life. Steam power moved households from farms to factories. Mass production sent women and children into wage labor. The internet transformed how a generation learns, plays, and connects. Now, artificial intelligence is entering classrooms, workplaces, and even clinics, bringing new forms of disruption and possibility. It is in the family where economic shocks and technological fractures appear first. Leaving them out of AI governance is profoundly short-sighted. I am delighted today to talk to Ron Ivey, founder and CEO of Noēsis Collaborative, which works to mitigate the risks of AI and proactively shape AI for human flourishing. I'm Joe Waters, and this is Per Capita. Ron Ivey, founder and CEO of Noēsis Collaborative, thank you for joining us on Per Capita.
Thanks, Joe. Excited to be here with you.
So, Ron, Capita recently conducted a national survey, parents with children under the age of 12, about 3,000 parents across the country. 43% of them said they think AI is going to make their family less economically secure. Only 20% think AI is going to make them more economically secure, despite what we've seen from AI stocks on the stock market. How should we be thinking about the stability, the predictability, and quality of life for families in this moment of technological revolution, the age of AI, we might call it?
There's two things. One is just the role of economic security in flourishing, human flourishing, both at the individual level and the family level. And that's something we've been looking at. And my role as a research fellow at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program is, economic stability is not necessarily an end that people pursue, but it's so critical for forming relationships, having a sense of purpose and meaning in life, having developing the character of the individual, but also the family and the relationships. And when you have that insecurity, it just erodes all those other elements of flourishing. What I'm concerned about on the AI front, it seems to be uneven in terms of how it's going to impact different demographics, different classes, and undermining certain types of families and strengthening others. The biggest concern is that we're going to see some kind of continued concentration of wealth, concentration of prosperity at the very top of the system, and undermining those at the bottom and the middle, and kind of gobbling up the opportunity to a very small set of individuals that have access to AI capabilities or understanding AI capabilities or working on them or associated with companies that are either integrating them in their corporate activities or developing them as well. And the rest of the economy may get left out. What's a curious thing right now is there might be positive impacts for those that are less affected in terms of blue collar workers in fields that are localized to a particular community, whether that's electricians or plumbers or those that are doing work on an operations level that requires very active use of the body and use of practical skills in daily work, versus those that are in a more rote knowledge professions, more at risk, especially younger families that have younger professionals that are entering the workforce in the next 4 to 5 years, and starting families in those early years. So my biggest concern would be for those that are in their late 20s, early 30s, in that white collar profession or in a profession that's going to be automated by some of the newest technologies, and then that undermining that early stage stability, which is already an issue, as you know well, in terms of the current economy, and family formation and the development of that sense of stability for the family. So those are my biggest concerns right now. And then on the education front, making sure that all levels of society are able to develop their human capabilities and their human skills in a way that's more equitable. There seems to be, more effort and economic resources at the very top of the system to develop those capabilities, and less concern for the broader population. And finally, there's just the speed at how these things are developed, and how families can keep up, workers can keep up. I think that's a real risk and concern that our civil society and our academic institutions and our state governments, local governments are having a hard time keeping up with the speed of the development and understanding, the impacts. Those are all challenges that I'm seeing right now.
I want to get to that last point because I think that really speaks to the issues of governance and policy. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit more about education and the type of education that you think will be required in the years ahead. To my mind, in order to sort of adapt to this new reality, the answer is not going to be to just make sure that everyone is very educated about how to use AI well, but to go deeply into the sort of humanistic learning, which is what really develops those human capabilities that forms us in the habits and the dispositions to use technologies well. Is that your sense of it too?
Yeah, I think there's a big push right now at all levels of education to push AI, particularly generative AI, into the classroom. And I think there's a concern that we're getting, we're emphasizing the actual use of the tool versus the development of the human capability that could use future tools that are developed by the time that kid graduates. And when we think about, the future work activities that have happened over the last 10 years, I was involved kind of in the early stage, development of some research and reporting around future work in the kind of 2017, 2018, 2019 time period. And it was fascinating during that time period. There was a lot of emphasis on skills gaps and job training and this type of activity. And I proposed at that time period of, shouldn't we be thinking more about human capabilities and development of human capabilities? And I got a lot of dead stares at that moment. I'm having a different set of conversations with philanthropies, with education officials, with workforce development officials, where there's a kind of openness to take a step back and say, no, what are actual human capabilities? And should we be reorienting education around that? And at a deeper, more fundamental level, what is human flourishing, and how do we orient all levels of education, especially the higher ed component, or the continuing ed or community college, to these elements of human flourishing that are kind of an afterthought in many cases for education. But in the context of AI, as the AI develops, AI systems develop, if you don't have that more sophisticated understanding of what human capabilities are, you may be training for last year's product, or a product from 3 years ago or 5 years ago, not necessarily training on the person and developing the person, forming the person on the kind of fundamental things that don't necessarily change about us and that lead to our own flourishing in adult
Right.
life. So that's I think a key shift. That's a positive shift in some ways, is that there's a kind of openness to reimagine the education system in a way that's more oriented up towards that, because you just can't predict how these technologies are changing. They're changing so quickly, on a month-to-month basis, and it requires taking that step back to say, wait a minute, what are these fundamental capabilities? And that's something that's been interesting on the human flourishing research side, is there's been quite a bit of emphasis on, you know, emotional states, mental states, well-being as a kind of framing for human flourishing, which is important. And there's also this other long tradition of looking at capacities, capability development, all the way back to Aristotle, but then also to modern thinkers like Martha Nussbaum, Amartya Sen. And one of the cool things, I've been involved is just bringing those different conversations together to say, really, what are these fundamental capabilities, and how do they link up to these ends or aspirations that we have in terms of human flourishing? If we are trying to find more purpose and meaning in life, if we're trying to develop relationships, are there kind of existential or spiritual capabilities that we need to develop that even at the secular pluralistic level we need to be thinking about? Obviously, relationships are a huge theme that you and I have both worked on both the research side and also the civil society and kind of multi-sector thinking. But are we really thinking about relational capabilities as a thing that we're developing in education? I don't think it's been necessarily always an intentional development. And then other capabilities, behavioral, technical skills, et cetera, that are some of the more traditional things, but thinking about them holistically for a child or for children more broadly, and then young adults. Are we really having that kind of framing, or are we just thinking about jobs and skills gaps? I don't think that's fit for purpose anymore.
Right, and it's relational and moral. So one of the things that I've sort of observed in this conversation is that there's been a big push for safeguards, and I absolutely think that there should be safeguards both built into the tech and imposed by a strong juridical and regulatory framework from government. But what I've heard almost nothing about, with the exception of Shannon Valor at University of Edinburgh, whose idea this is, right, is there's been no discussion about the cultivation of the techno-moral virtues to help us ensure that our children and future generations are frankly capable of acting morally
Right.
in a digital and artificial intelligence architecture, right?
Right.
And I'm really interested in that idea of how do we develop in people these powers, right? These powers of souls, these powers of will to act well in a world that is totally different from the world of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, we've been exploring that through Noēsis, through a series of different projects, both on the more product design front with product designers and product policy people within various companies, and on the investment side to look at, can you move beyond a harm framework, especially for kids and for teens, and really have this flourishing framework in the way that you think about design? What are the capabilities on moral and social side that we need to develop, both in, off the screen, away from the technology, maybe if the technology is now moving into an audio format or whatever, where there's an interaction, still away from those interactions, and then in those interactions with AI, how do you develop the person so that they can discern how to best use the technology in their relationships, in their own pursuit of their sense of meaning and purpose in their spiritual life, in their, like you say, volitional, moral, at the deeper level of the will. If you start with people's aspirational goals and you work your way backward and think about, okay, if I want to become a better person, people use that language, and I
Right.
want to be better at my relationships, and I want to have that deeper sense of purpose in my life. What are those skill sets that I need to develop? Part of that's happening needs to happen in with the actual product teams themselves. So there's some really cool stuff happening with product developers that are having these conversations. Hey, if I don't develop this on my own end, how does that get translated in? It doesn't get translated into the technology when I'm actually designing. Then in the discernment side, there's an opportunity, and we're working on specific platforms and projects to help churches, civil society institutions, communities, and larger institutions that have community at scale, to have tools, resources to develop those capabilities, especially the discernment side of things, and understand, okay, what are the things I need to develop in this new context? What are the things that are timeless? But then also, especially when we look at AI and human relationships, it's a new phenomenon. This is the first time in history that we're experiencing those interactions. There's like this timeless element that is not changing, but we need to bring the development of that to these new technologies. And then within the new technologies themselves, we need to understand how to interact, but then also, are the interactions actually degrading, in Shannon's terms, de-skilling us? We've seemed to have degraded on a general level in terms of our social capabilities over the last few decades, even before the introduction of smartphones and social media, the introduction of social chatbots, social AI companions in particular, could degrade that further. On the moral front, I think there's some really rich questions there, because from my understanding, and this is also, I think, the great work of Sherry Turkle at MIT, the chatbot itself does not have moral standing with us. It doesn't have moral capabilities. It's really just, predicting what the next, word or set of phrases should be based off of statistical prediction. It doesn't have that fundamental capacity for empathy, for moral guidance. And that gets really scary if children and teens are going more and more to a chatbot to ask deeper questions about moral dilemmas they're in. So how do you develop the teen or the child's moral capacity to engage, in a way that's safe for them, that protects them, but also orients them towards this, more positive goal of flourishing? And how do you prepare families to, be asking these deeper questions, or in some cases, for both families and educational systems, should we even be letting kids interact with chatbots if they don't have moral capacity, and we don't really know if they're going to negatively degrade the social and emotional skills of that child? And those are the most unique things that we have as humans. Should we be setting our child in front of a chatbot for 2 hours a day? And some schools are doing this. ChatGPT and the other chatbots that came online in the last few years, it's a new thing in that its ability to mimic us is a real game changer.
Yeah. And I think we should also just clarify. I mean, I'm curious to your thoughts on this. When we say mimic us, I mean, we just had a convening in South Africa. We had a whole session on AI and human dignity. The majority of people in the room were Africans, and they raised this interesting point. Well, when we say mimics us, we mean mimics Americans and Europeans.
Exactly. It builds off of a value structure and a set of content and a corpus of content that's, majority of it's Western. There's so many diverse cultures that are not represented, or languages that aren't represented in that corpus of data, or in the design of the models. Because there are when the way that the models are designed, the algorithms, there are value choices and moral choices that are being, selected there. And those are mostly a subset of our culture in a certain zip code, in a very narrow, set of our society is making those choices. And then that has an impact on everyone that's using those technologies.
Yeah.
The interaction is changing us in ways that we may not be understanding and imagining, just based on the data we're seeing so far. It's early days. We don't have there's
Right.
not a lot of data that's out there. It's only 3 years of interactions.
Right.
But the top line message is: would you leave your child with a stranger for 2 hours a day that you didn't know, that you probably had a strong understanding that it didn't have a moral conscience, had zero empathy, it has no empathy, and yet it's giving guidance and giving, direction for that child when that child is asking questions on a whole range of topics? Would you feel comfortable giving your child to a stranger? And that's, unfortunately, I think a lot of people are doing that without really thinking about it, because they have this logic in their head of, oh, I don't want my kid to, be left behind. I don't want them to not develop these skills. Maybe it's, that's not necessarily the skills they need to develop to be good at AI systems. They need creativity. They need, an understanding of moral frameworks. They need a understanding of history and human nature, and these kind of deeper developments that help them respond in the use of the technology in the future. Because again, the technology is going to change rapidly.
Right. So let's turn now to talk a little bit about governance and policy. And I think one of the things that we at Capita have been very interested in is we've sort of observed distinct or relatively siloed conversations about AI. So there's like a workforce conversation happening, impacts of AI on labor. There's a human connection conversation happening. There's a child rights and child safety conversation. And of course, where we're interested is in the impact of AI on all of those, because all of those relate to the stability, predictability, and quality of life for the most fundamental group unit of society, which is the family, right? And so I'm just curious if you could think with me here out loud, like, how can we drive governance and policy that isn't just about addressing human connection, that isn't just about
Right.
addressing child rights and safety, but really is about supporting the stability, predictability, and quality of life beginning in the family through our communities, and then more broadly to actually contribute to the protection, if not the promotion, of the common good in this sort of new industrial revolution that we're living through.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first we need to look at what are the drivers for the development of AI right now. And at the very highest levels, they are individual gain of those that are developing the technologies on a material side. There's like individual, like, hey, I want to create something cool and I want to be at the cutting edge. Um, there are shareholder maximization concerns of how do I get a return on investment on my particular product. And then, on the policy side, the two primary things that are driving how the regulatory world and the policy world, especially this year, are thinking about it are geopolitics. How do we beat China? And then how do we drive economic growth? There needs to be a third framework that civil society, faith-based institutions, academia, policy leaders need to rally around, and that's human flourishing. And human flourishing needs to be more robust and more clear as a not necessarily saying, hey, those other two objectives are bad. I don't think that gets you anywhere, but you need to have an alignment of a coalition of institutions that are working towards this third objective. And within that, we know that individual flourishing is driven by the family, by those relationships, by friendship, by community, um, by the common good in terms of the environmental and social context in which people live. And through that, look at, okay, then you can have a more holistic view of work, education, human connection, how these things all fit together, and how and have less siloed conversations on the policy front, because you have that bigger lens. Until you have that bigger lens, you're going to get caught up in the debate of these other two big drivers. So that's one piece, looking at how work plays into family stability. There's a certain narrative, even among those that are doing the scenario planning on the economic front. Um, Molly Kinder at Brookings just spoke at the Notre Dame AI Faith and Flourishing event a few weeks ago about some scenario planning that she was a part of, where there was a group of economists, some of the leading economists in the United States, meeting with those that were experts in the AI capabilities, and just thinking about, okay, where are things going? What are the different scenarios we could be in right now? And there was one scenario where there was no work in the future, and yet everyone was, there was abundance and everyone had what they needed. And the economists in the room thought that was an amazing scenario. And Molly was just stepping back and saying, okay, I don't think these people are really thinking through how important work is for dignity, for community standing, for the flourishing of that individual family in the context of a social, relationships at a local level in particular. Um, but if you have that flourishing lens, and if you have that way of looking at it, you say, okay, these aren't just individuals that are maximizing utility. These are people that are embedded in relationships, and their whole psychological well-being is wrapped up in having a sense of dignity and having a purpose in their daily life. And we need to be setting policies around that. I think there's also, too, I think, a really interesting perspective of, is our policy objective and our company objective, our design objective, to mimic human capabilities in the development of AI systems? Or is it to augment and support human capabilities? If you have a flourishing lens, and within that, the context of family as the developmental, the heart of development of an individual, and the heart of a social relationships that individual's in, the heart of a community that thrives or not, then you would have a capability lens. You wouldn't have a mimicking lens in terms of how can we orient all of our technological development, all of our economic resources, all our investment from a DoD perspective into the mimicking of human capabilities in the design of these technologies. You would have a different paradigm. I'm not saying I'm not naive or too idealistic that that's going to go away, but there is a positive thing that I'm seeing in the last 6 months where there seems to be a network of both progressive and conservative leaders and institutions that do have either family flourishing or community flourishing or human flourishing more generally as a North Star for their work. And they're seeing that they actually have more in common, even if they're, progressive Jewish group or a more conservative Catholic group or a Hindu, whatever the
Right.
background, or secular humanist groups as well. There seems to be a coalescing around this third framework and starting to work together on the policy front and also on the product design, product development standards, and then the third, the community discernment, faith-based discernment, civil society discernment on how do I use these products for my own flourishing. So just to summarize, you need a third way of thinking about it, and you
Mm-hmm.
need a big coalition that is orienting these kind of three, lanes of work towards that end, knowing that, hey, we're not gonna exit the China US,
Right.
competition.
And in fact, I would say that maybe this is not how the current U.S. administration is thinking about it, but in more of a historical view over the last 80 or so years, the post World War II war. I mean, I would say actually the United States winning in that competition
Right.
matters for human flourishing and human well-being.
100%. It's integrated. It's all integrated.
Yeah.
And I think you see that in some of the historical examples of the 1940s and 50s, in terms of the way the government was thinking about and different sectors were thinking about the different policy responses from the FDR world and then after of, hey, we need to have a more decentralized economy. We don't want monopoly power, totally concentrated in one set of entities. We want more, civil society involvement and stronger families, and we need this public infrastructure to support that. It goes both ways. If you want a really solid, stable politics and military response and security, you don't want the entire society to be distrusting each other and to be totally fraying relationally, and you don't want your future military force to be psychologically breaking down because of the negative impacts of some of these technologies. You do need to have a flourishing lens inside that too. So it goes both ways.
So, Ron, I'd like just to think about the lay of the land in terms of these three frameworks you laid out: economic growth, geopolitics, maximizing sort of for competition with China in the case of the United States and Europe as well. And then the third framework for human flourishing in the age of AI, which to me has a lot of implications for dignity of work, dignity of labor, the inviolability of the family, and so forth. But what it seems to me like when I look at sort of the lay of the land in DC and even in state houses across the country, folks seem a little bit confused about where they sort of are landing. You have people on right and left, Josh Hawley and Chris Murphy, who I would say are at least trending in the human flourishing direction, very concerned about the impact on workers. Senator Blumenthal, I think as well is heading in that direction. But even when there are voices on the right that are moving in that direction, the administration, the Trump administration, at least from my perspective, seems to be stuck primarily in the geopolitical competition framework. So can you just give me just your sense, particularly sitting as you do as an American in Europe, of the lay of the land and where maybe some of the opportunities for coalition building are right now?
Yeah, I think you have to start with where were we a few years ago under the Biden administration and from the European perspective, how the EU responded to AI over the recent years. And I think from my perspective, there seems to have been a heavy emphasis on safety and existential risk, especially existential risk, uh, and how do we mitigate those things? Not saying that that's bad, but there wasn't necessarily as much rhetoric and policy focused on innovation, on how do we win on a global level in this geopolitical environment with, especially autocratic governments that are advancing really quickly with this technology. And now you have a correction, kind of the other direction in the Trump administration, where they're going completely opposite, and coupled with kind of this dynamic of woke AI versus anti-woke AI happening on the left versus right, and using that as a political advantage to deal with some of the questions and concerns about how free speech were being managed at the AI companies, at the tech companies, in a way that probably was alienating for some parts of the
Mm,
population. And so they kind of took the moment in terms of, hey, we need to go this other direction, and we can really use this to our advantage from a political standpoint to say, hey, we're anti-woke AI. What I think you're seeing now is there's a growing kind of new movement, both on the left and the right, to say, hey, like I said, we need to think about innovation. We need to think about a future-oriented, positive-oriented vision for AI, and we need to make sure that's grounded in human flourishing, grounded in the family, or grounded in some of these other contexts of the social and environmental that are just common sense when you really think through the impact of data centers. And you think, look at water, or when you look at the economy and you say, hey, we're now potentially going to have a federal backstop for a multi-billion trillion dollar companies in terms of what they're doing and their investment. Is this really good from an economic standpoint for the broad population? It may help us win against China. It may help us advance artificial superintelligence or general intelligence for that game, but it might undermine our society and our government and our politics. When I entered in January into this year, I thought, okay, there's no opening for policy. There's no opening for anything at the federal level. It's probably going to be very difficult at the state level. But I literally, in May, June timeframe, I had to shift my own work priorities to really focus on policy, specifically around kids and how to protect kids, but also orient it towards a positive end, because I was seeing so many bipartisan conversations that were sprouting up in private conversations, both in on the U.S. side, but also here in the UK and EU side as well. And that's been awesome and inspiring and very different from what you see in the nightly news, what you see in the political journals and the political blogs and social media. There seems to be something forming that even within the Trump administration, I'm seeing a shift of certain individuals that are saying, hey, yes, we need to be thoughtful about family, kids in particular, and teens. And that's opening up a conversation, I think, about family and family stability. There seems to be a shift um, away from this kind of nihilistic, like we should do whatever we want. There's no moral framework for anything we do as long as we're dominating this war with China and dominating the market,
right.
to, I
And of
don't
course,
know.
the nihilistic stuff could completely decimate the lives of families and communities in places like Kansas City, Missouri, right, or Lubbock, Texas. You name it, right? Sort of the quintessential middle of the country,
Right,
and not even to mention the places in the world, right,
right.
where there aren't necessarily even the resources that families in the United States might have access to protect their children or to get their children mental health, professional help if that's required, and so forth. But it is curious because I do want to be quite positive about the potential of AI to actually accelerate human flourishing if we get the framework right here at the beginning. I mean, I think, for example, about the tremendous opportunities for drug development, for cancer screening and identification that could really, extend human life, that has the potential maybe even to democratize treatments around the world. Like, these could be real gains for human flourishing.
Right, right. I think that's what I'm seeing too. I think there's a lot of attention on generative AI, chatbots, but there's a whole set of innovations that are happening in other types of AI systems that are advancing these types of developments in the healthcare space, the medicine space, even the education space. One of the things that I think I'm seeing educators are starting to come around is, okay, we need to be thinking, how do AI systems actually alleviate and reduce the administrative burden, reduce the cost of education? It's not necessarily that we want every kid in front of a chatbot every day, but how does are there other either generative AI or other types of AI systems that actually can revolutionize the back end of education at all different levels, either that elementary, high school, college, continuing ed. There seems to be really cool developments that are happening there. And then, yeah, within manufacturing, within robotics, within the different industrial applications, there are daily advances that are happening that could be really powerful. On the energy front, I think that could be a really, we're already starting to see exciting things happen in terms of advancing forms of energy that are more productive and more efficient on the outcome side in terms of energy development, and less resource extractive, or using less resources on the input side, and more sophisticated uses of nuclear and other forms of energy that we probably wouldn't have seen if we didn't have artificial intelligence in the mix. Or on the demand side, just the demand for energy is forcing people to rethink and reimagine how energy is developed at scale. So that's exciting as well. I was just back in my home state of Oklahoma, and there, things that seem to be really exciting about how energy development is changing in ways that could be even beneficial for the environment, and change the way water and energy are used.
Mm-hmm. So let's just step back from the sort of national and global for a minute, and imagine you're a principal school in a place like Oklahoma, or you're a community health worker in, say, Zimbabwe. You're a city, county commissioner. What should you be doing in this moment?
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity to step back and say, okay, what's the purpose and objective and use cases that we're really, focused on in terms of the development of AI and the use of AI. We were taking a step back to look at education, and think about what is the purpose of education? What are we trying to develop? So at the community level, or at an institutional level, in a hospital, at a local community hospital, or in a school, not jumping right into what are the available technologies that are getting marketed to me, because there's a massive amount of marketing that's getting done at these levels. But no, let's, as an institution, let's, as a community, first ask, what's our vision? What are our objectives? What do we need? Where are we having problems that this could be used as a solution? And then discerning what is the right AI technology or AI system to support that particular use case or problem that we're trying to solve. Like in education, is it going to help reduce the administrative burden for teachers, or the amount of work that they have to do? My mom was a middle school teacher, so I saw her every day come home after teaching all day, and then she had to grade papers, and she had to do all the administrative work, after she dealt with us, and made sure we were still alive and taken care of. Are there tools that can help that teacher, help that individual? For a
Right.
nurse, are there AI tools that could reduce the administrative burden or the stress of that individual's
Well,
work?
yeah. I
And
mean,
that. I'm sure you're familiar with that on
Yeah, it's already.
your
I
side.
mean, we were with actually at our son's well child visit, his 5-year-old well child visit a few weeks ago, and talking to his doctor, and she was saying it's already taken 2 hours a night off of charting. She's charting 2 hours a night less because they're using this ambient AI tool to record visits, which are then deleted from the cloud after the note is created. And so she's really just checking the work that the AI has done
Right.
and saving quite a bit of time. At least 10 hours a week in her
That's huge.
telling, which is time, with her family, with her young son and husband, and it was something else really to think about. And then I was at the Milken Institute Future of Health summit last week where the president of Jefferson Health in Philadelphia said ambient's now being used 11,000 visits per week at Jefferson Health. So just thinking about the amount of time potentially back to physicians and nurses in
Right.
that one system is pretty incredible. The concern though is that time back for people to spend with their families and the other activities that we know are conducive to human flourishing? Or is that time back for the systems in which they're a part to squeeze a little bit more revenue from
Right.
a few more visits out of those providers?
Right. I think the work has to be done inside the institution to think about the beneficiary of the service, the human that's involved, the person that's working, whether that's the teacher or the hospital administrator or the doctor. How does this advance their capabilities? It's back to the capabilities piece. It's not about how do I mimic and replace, it's how do I advance capabilities. On the higher level component at the national level, to some degree the state level, that's where you get into policy questions about tax, about monopoly power, about the way the financial system is structured, the way the economy is structured. Because if you don't change the AI system above the AI system,
Right.
that you're going to have incentives that are anti-human flourishing, that continue to concentrate wealth and opportunity at the very top and make the rest of the whole system highly unstable. It's like taking all the blood all the way to the brain, and there's no blood for the heart, there's no blood for the body. We've been in that scenario already for the last couple decades, and now AI will accelerate that if we don't really think hard and work hard in a bipartisan way to address the systemic issues of the larger system that AI systems are a part of. So you've got the actual AI systems themselves, the businesses they're in, the the investors and the kind of markets they're in, and then the policy, and then the cultural systems. Right now, we're talking about the policy. You really need to be thinking about, okay, how do we prevent the incentive structures at the economic level not driving all the returns and all the value to the very top? We can't put all this on families. We can't put this all on the communities to figure out. There's some national leadership that needs to happen on the way that the fundamental economy is structured, and the way that, particularly, kind of how economic resources are concentrated among a very few in our society in a way that we haven't seen in 100 years.
Yeah. So, Ron, 25, 30 years from now,
Yeah.
what, for the work that you're doing,
Hmm.
what does success look like in terms of more human flourishing 25, 30 years from now versus less, right? In a world that presumably will be even more saturated than we've been in the last 3 years by AI.
At the fundamental core of what I'm doing is building alliances, collaboration, kind of bringing different silos of expertise together to work on aligning AI to human flourishing. And I think about the future in three parts. On the product design and the actual company side, can we have a set of companies and startups, and within the bigger companies, a network of product developers and leaders that are starting to shift the product development side to a flourishing framework, knowing that there's always going to be these other drivers, like we said, within the companies. But new business models are succeeding, new models of how the AI human interaction are being developed. We're starting to see positive movement on that front in terms of the design principles that we've developed with the USC Neely Center, and then promoted through the various platforms. There's starting to be some uptick within the bigger companies, and we're getting exposure to investors and a startup ecosystem that's excited about that and started to adopt that. So that adoption has happened, and we're winning the marketplace. In order to win the marketplace, you have to have the demand side, and I think the success for me, 30 years, is there's been a coalition of faith-based institutions, civil society institutions, academia that is helping inform the demand side of this equation and helping people discern at the individual level, the family level, what products should I be buying? You could think about the healthy foods movement as an analogy. Obviously our food system needs significant work. Just comparing my own experience of U.S. versus
Right.
France, we've got a ways to go, but we've significantly evolved on the health of our food. Could we see a similar side of a greater awareness on the market side of, hey, what kinds of use of AI technologies is actually leading to my flourishing? And how do we have practical tools and content and making sure that's, changing the demand side to where that's shifting and responding to the product design side that I stated earlier. And then third, we've got a political movement that's bipartisan, that's putting in the guardrails and the safety components, but also, really thinking about how do we have the institutional design at the policy level and the economic level that's moved beyond this kind of zombie neoliberalism that we're still to some degree
Mm-hmm.
in,
Yep.
but that we're which we've done before. That we've shifted
Sure.
our political economy in positive ways. We've digressed and we've gone backwards on that. But having that kind of stable political movement and policy movement that has reoriented the policies for the broader common good and well-being of families. There's like green shoots right now, and there's positive things that are happening that's bipartisan, starting with kids and kind of increasing that aperture to think about the full life cycle of individuals. It's easiest to do with kids because everybody can agree on that front, but my hope is that we can expand that. And I think faith and spirituality is a pathway to do that, even if you're coming from different faith perspectives, or even if you're coming from a secular humanist perspective. There's a way to think about these things on a deeper level that it seems to be happening.
And just on that last point about sort of the different faith and philosophical perspectives, it reminds me of something in James Davison Hunter's book, Democracy and Solidarity. We need a meta-humanism for the age of AI, right?
Right,
We
right.
need Jewish, classical, Christian, Confucian, right, indigenous perspectives brought into this conversation. So I agree with everything you just said.
Right.
I would just add that key to that success is going to be authentic inclusion and collaboration of the majority world,
Right.
which is only going to become more and more the majority world,
Right.
because right now this conversation, to my mind, is far too dominated by European and American voices, with of course some perspective, at least on the tech development from China. Last thing, I always love to ask people what's one project they've dreamed of but haven't started yet.
Hmm. I I would say I've started something, but haven't fully, had the time to execute it and fully develop it. Is this kind of deeper reflection on human capabilities and their role in human flourishing and how that translates into AI capability development. I think we're in the very early stages of that, but there's exciting, opportunities to advance both the kind of theoretical work, the conceptual work, and then translate that into practical guidance for those that are either on the product side or on the policy side. And like I said, I think that just paradigm shift from the Turing test, are we building something that thinks like us or talks like us, to, hey, let's have a different model of how does this AI actually augment and support human capabilities that help us flourish. That theoretical to the practical work is the work to be done in coming months and years. So I'm excited to work on that.
Ron Ivey, thank you for joining us on Per Capita.
You, Joe.
Always good to see you.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.